We have for many years given $1 million, and it's a paltry amount, $1 million a year to UNRWA, and supposedly that's used for education. Israel and the Jewish community here have long said that is funding terrorism, and there would appear to be some truth now to what they have said. And we haven't yet given the $1 million we've pledged this year. So the question now is, should we? Now, Winston Peters would, I don't know if he's sitting on the fence here, but Foreign Affairs says they are reviewing that payment. I know it's not a lot of money, but the moral question of where we stand in supporting terrorism is a much bigger issue than $1 million. To discuss all this and the events of the last few days, we are joined now, and I'm never quite too sure what to call you, David. Are you a spokesperson for the New Zealand Jewish Council or the New Zealand Israeli Association? David, you there?
Yeah, Sean, hi. Yeah, I'm the co-director of the Israel Institute.
Co-director of the Israel Institute. All right. David, let's look at the last few days. Firstly, that International Court of Justice, well, it wasn't a ruling. It was a decision to allow the case to proceed, but it wasn't, as many claim, and the sort of people who, rent a mob who walk down Queen Street or walk in Dunedin, it certainly wasn't a confirmation that any genocide has occurred on or been carried out by Israel, is it?
No, not at all. And if there was, of course, there would be orders to stop the war. But I think the thing to keep in mind with this, Sean, is the case wasn't really brought about because anyone seriously thinks that Israel is committing genocide. Of course, the case was brought about because it means we all have to use that word in relation to Israel, and in the mind of many people who are not paying very close attention, those two things become synonymous, and over time Israel is just further demonized and attacks on Jews are justified.
Yeah, look, I can't say I disagree with you. And, of course, all the usual suspects have said, oh, yes, they're genocidal, and the real world revolved around them. Let's look then, and also, of course, there's been the accusation that the withholding of funding for UNRWA was a rebuke from the supporters of genocidal Israel, a rebuke to the ICJ. You and I have talked, and you've talked to me for a long time about your concerns about UNRWA. I first want to ask you, why do Palestinians have a special, completely separate United Nations agency to take care of them?
That's a great question. It kind of morphed out of what was intended to be a very temporary operation after the 1948 war to help the Arabs kind of get their feet under the desk, so to speak, and help them establish and get going and provide a little bit of aid to kickstart the process of building a state. What, of course, has happened is it has continued, and the Palestinians have taken billions of dollars of international aid, and as Hamas said, that's to support the people above ground, and we'll use the aid to build the tunnels underneath ground, thank you very much, and to launch rockets against Israel. So it started off with noble intentions, as many of these things do, and has turned into an absolute rot. And why it continues is a question that...
Okay. Well, even the organisation itself didn't wait for a full investigation. It fired 9 people. Is that the extent of the number of rotten apples in amongst the, 13,000 staff is it that it has, or 1,300 staff that it has?
Well, they eventually fired some people, but their first reaction, of course, was to attack the messenger, as they usually do. I think it was only when there were threats of withdrawal of funding behind the scenes that they decided that actually they must do something to try and restore their image. And so they've fired people. But the evidence that there have been at least a dozen UNRWA employees that were active participants in the October 7th pogrom, the brutal massacre and rape and slaughter of people, is just the tip of the iceberg. There's also been evidence of thousands of UNRWA employees in a Telegram channel that were championing and cheering along the massacre as it happened and in the days and months that followed. and glorifying the rapists and murderers as heroes. That, of course, reflects the curriculum that is taught in UNRWA schools that glorifies terror and has anti-Semitism throughout. So this is not just a couple of bad apples that were immediately fired by an otherwise righteous organization. This was a couple of seriously evil actors who eventually, kicking and screaming, the organization decided to step down, and a much, much, much deeper problem underneath that has gone unaddressed for decades.
They also seem to be doing a crap job because aid isn't getting through to the people who need it in Gaza, to the person in the street. And a lot of aid is being diverted or stopped, by Hamas.
Yeah, I think it's unfair to lay the blame on that solely at the feet of UNRWA. Any aid organisation, any organisation at all that would like to get aid to people in Gaza would have an extremely difficult time because there is a terror organisation that controls it and has done for the last 17 years. So I don't think it's fair to say that UNRWA can't get aid through, and that's a damning indictment. I think any aid organisation would have an extremely difficult time making sure that the thousands of truckloads of aid that is going through to the people of Gaza will get to them because of the terror group.
People do need aid there, David. You cannot deny there is human suffering on a large scale in Gaza, right? Okay.
Of course.
Is UNRWA now in a position to be able to help alleviate that suffering, or does the UN need to take a new approach here?
Well, your first question answers that. Why do the Arab Palestinians have a sole UN agency dedicated to them when every single other group of people in the world that is in desperate need of help, whether they be refugees or internally displaced people or just people after major natural events or man-made events, why does the UN help them without setting up a completely separate organisation with $1 billion a year budget? So yes, the people of Gaza need help. There's no doubt about that, of course, and now, unfortunately, more than ever. The question is who should provide that help? And I would say that it should not be an organisation that has a long history of support for terror, glorification of terror, teaching anti-Semitism to children in schools, and corruption. It should be an organisation that at least attempts to uphold the values that the United Nations purports to espouse.
All right. We've been giving them, $1 million a year for how long?
Yeah, probably since about 1949, but I don't know the exact numbers at that stage. At least for the last 2 decades, it's been $1 million a year in core funding plus some emergency relief funding. So there's been about $12 million over the last decade.
Okay. Which, to be honest, is in the scheme of things, is peanuts.
But it's 0.006% of the annual operating budget of UNRWA. And to put that into perspective, the living wage in New Zealand is $54,000 a year. That would be the equivalent, New Zealand's contribution to that would be the equivalent of $30.
Okay. So it really doesn't matter whether or not we keep giving this money.
Well, you would think that, and any rational person that does the numbers would come to that conclusion, but MPAT contends that if we withdraw funding, then the operations of UNRWA would struggle to exist.
Okay, so this basically comes down to, I think, a moral choice, and where do we stand, doesn't it, as a country?
Exactly. I agree, and there's been the US, the UK, Australia, Canada, Germany, Ireland, Finland, Scotland, Japan.
Now, Ireland,
France,
I think, Ireland hasn't suspended, I don't think.
Sorry, Italy.
Italy,
sorry.
yeah.
All of those, in 10 countries, have chosen to pause their funding while they figure out what's going on. MFAT yesterday made a comment that it's business as usual for them. They're not pausing funding.
Well, no, we've been told that they are reviewing the issue. We've tried to get Winston Peters on today and he wouldn't front. And I'll put a question on this to the Prime Minister if he holds a post-cabinet press conference this afternoon, David, because I think it does come down not to the dollars and cents, which are insignificant, but to a moral issue.